While we're probably going to think of 2020 as the year of COVID, I would like to think of it as a year where we really came together as a community, and how fortunate we are to have an incredible chamber like ours, staffed by incredible people who have continued to give us opportunities to network and to have fellowship. So thank you very much to the chamber. Before we go too much further, I'd like to introduce our platinum members. They are Cook Walden Davis Funeral Home, City of Georgetown, Georgetown Behavioral Health Institute, Georgetown Rail Equipment Company, Radiation Detection Company, St. David's Georgetown Hospital, and the Wesleyan. At this time, I'd like to ask what few ambassadors we might have with us this morning to go ahead and rise and be recognized. All right, not quite half, but we're getting there. And at this time, we will introduce our attendees. We'll just stand, no microphone, and introduce ourselves. Starting at this table, Steve.
Steve Farnham from Four Nomads Travel.
TJ Shea, Georgetown Behavior. Ray Langbaum, Director of Business at Georgetown Behavioral Health.
Back table.
Terry Sweats, Berkshire Hathaway, Texas Realty.
Mitzi Merchant, St. Gabriel's Funeral Home.
Dwayne Boyson, Williamson County Democrats.
Ron.
Ron Garland, an ambassador, individual member of the chamber, as well as the Rotary Club of Georgetown.
Larry Copperman, I'm with Strength.
Scott Stout, Keller Williams Realty.
Nick Leshke, Georgetown Living and an ambassador.
Connie Clark, CPA, partner with Classy Lane.
Jim Johnson with the Georgetown Chamber.
Kayleen Sellen with the Georgetown Chamber.
Allison.
Allison McKee with the Georgetown Chamber.
And
Okay, I'm Bridget Weber. I'm with the City of Georgetown. Thank you.
Terry Wilson, U.S. Army retired.
David Morgan, City of Georgetown.
excellent. Round of applause for all those today. So you know what this means with such a light crowd. We're already 5 minutes in and done with all the admin notes. That means our speakers get a longer time to speak.
Yeah.
All right. And we're going to start with David Morgan. As you know, David Morgan has served as the city manager of the City of Georgetown since his appointment in May 2015 as the Chief Administrative and Executive Officer for the City of Georgetown. David is responsible for the daily operations of the city. Prior to Georgetown, David worked for the city of Richardson, where he served for 17 years in many positions, including the Deputy City Manager, Chief Operating Officer for about 3 years. He received his bachelor's degree in communication in the communication arts from Austin College in Sherman, Texas, and a master's degree in public administration from Texas Tech University. Currently, Morgan serves as a member of the Austin Area Research Organization and is the regional president for the Texas City Management Association. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Morgan.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and take my mask off. Stand far enough away. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. For those who are in person, we appreciate you. I know there are a lot of people that are tuning in virtually, and appreciate y'all as well. This year has definitely been a unique year. I think I see it as an opportunity. Challenges create opportunities to grow and to be able to pivot. And one of the things that's certain in my mind is that we live in an environment of high rate of change. And this has been an example of that. And so for us to be successful in the future, we've got to be prepared for an environment that continues to see changes, and we've got to be resilient through that. I know from our perspective, we've really been working as an organization in the way in which we serve our community to be principle-based, because we know that as you set strategies and set goals, that when the environment changes, you need to adjust to those. And so we've been really focused on making sure that we have a firm set of foundational principles and priorities that we work on as we work through this pandemic. So the first one is that the first couple are obvious. We want to be able to keep our employees safe, to be able to provide services, and we want to keep the public, our community safe as possible. And then also, in the same manner, we want to provide as many services as possible. And so you've seen through this pandemic, we've shifted to work to make sure that our services can be available. A great example of that is our public library, who we did not shut down. We moved to delivery service, to curbside service, to pick up and to-go services. And I applaud our employees at the library as well as employees across our organization, been working to make sure that our services are as available as possible through the pandemic. And I know that this will be a backdrop as we look at next legislative session at the state capitol, that the pandemic will be a backdrop of that. I know there are several key issues that'll be worked on and addressed at the state legislature. Appreciate our local delegation and Representative Terry Wilson, which I'll keep trying to call you Terry. It's just really hard, sir. And I'll quit calling you sir, but I'm really trying to respect what you're wanting me to call you. But Representative Wilson is a great advocate for our region, for his district, and appreciate his work. And I'm thankful that he's here today. You may ask, why is the city of Georgetown talking about the Texas legislature, what's going to happen over the next session? What's interesting is that, and I'll do it just for the room, but how many cities are in Texas?
Oh my God.
Now I'm going to count the ones that are like 4 in population to millions in population.
10,000.
10,000. Wow, that's good. 87. Well, okay, y'all are going really high. That's great. Well, Texas is a big state. There's but it's not that big. There are 1,700, a little over 1,700 cities in the state of Texas. You can imagine that how a local policy body, a council, city council, how they make decisions and the framework in which they make decisions and the priorities in the local community can vary quite a bit, whether you're in Fort Stockton, Texas, to Midland, to Odessa, to Amarillo, to East Texas. But one of the things that we recognize is that we are, at its core, we're the closest to the people that maintain the quality of life of a community. This is just a graphic that shows all the different types of services that we provide at the city of Georgetown. You can see it's a broad range of services, and it's important for us to be able to have the ability to be able to make those decisions, basically be responsive to the interests and needs of our own community. This is just a snapshot, and I'll read them off because it may be hard for people virtually to see this, but this is just a snapshot of bills filed from 2001 through 2019 through different sessions. You can see here that the range of bills that were filed at the state legislature ranged between 5,700 in 2001 to the last session of 7,500. And of those, you can see here the passage is actually pretty even of the number of bills that get passed. Somewhere ranging from 1,600 to into the 1,200s. Last session was a little over 1,400 bills that were passed. If you look at the number of bills that are related to local government, related to cities, we estimate that it's over 2,000. So over a fourth of the bills filed in the last session somehow related to city government. And I think that's because of the broad range of services that we provide. And so that purely is the reason why we really think it's necessary to be able to track legislation, to be able to advocate on legislation, because there's so much legislation that could impact cities. And so we think it's important to be able to be a part of that. One of the things I want to cover, so the things I want to cover this morning is just how we approach that, how we've done it differently this year through an intergovernmental affairs committee. It's a subcommittee by council, a legislative task force made up of residents and board chairs across all of our boards with 23 members in that group. The outreach and engagement efforts we're going to be making over the next several months and throughout the legislative session with our community, just to communicate where things are and how people can get involved. I will highlight our legislative agenda, although I want to respect the time, so I'll highlight that, but it's all available online, recently adopted by our city council. And then just talking about how we will be engaging throughout the session. So, like I said before, what is our role in Austin? It's to represent Georgetown residents. I think that's why it's critical for us to make sure that we are representative, which is why we work this session with our board and commission members who, in my mind, are folks that have signed up to spend, to really invest and make sure that Georgetown is a great place to live, whether it be on the Animal Control Board to Planning and Zoning Commission to our Economic Development Boards. We also, our role is to communicate with our legislators, and specifically our local delegation, and then to monitor activity as it occurs throughout the legislative session. So this year, I talked about it, we had kind of the more unique thing that we did this year, and I'm glad we've done it, and I think we're absolutely benefited from it, and I know that it will continue in the future. But we basically established a subcommittee on the council, so it's the mayor and two council members. Two council members are Steve Fowl and Rachel Johnrow, as well as mayor, which will transition to the mayor-elect, Josh Schrader. And they will be a subcommittee that we can work with them to more actively monitor things, knowing that we have 2 meetings a month for council meetings, and so it can be difficult to stay on top of, because things can happen quickly down at the state capitol. And so we wanted to make sure we had a subcommittee that could respond quickly if needed. We also then created a legislative task force made up of all our boards commissions. We met from the August to October timeframe, we provided staff, provided information to that body. It was hard to do over Zoom. We did it over Zoom or over Teams. It was hard to do it that way. I think it'd been more productive to be in person, but we had to do it that way just based on the pandemic. But we had great participation, great attendance, and frankly, the language that we developed initially really got modified based on the feedback from the committee, and I think that we're better off for it. And so appreciate their work, but it's making sure that we have good public engagement through a process, even as we're starting or developing our legislative agenda. So that a legislative agenda was adopted. It was adopted by the city council, the last city council meeting, by resolution, but it came, the language came as a recommendation from that task force, and there weren't any changes from the task force to as the council approved it. So what is our state agenda? It basically serves as the foundation for our advocacy strategy. It allows for us to have a high level of position statements, and then includes funding needs and policy priorities. So it incorporates all of that. I'm going to talk about at a high level what's in there, but there is a document that's available online. I really encourage you to look at that in more detail. There is a statement at the beginning of our legislative agenda that's to protect the city of Georgetown's interest. That's really the purpose of the legislative agenda. The city of Georgetown, the city supports legislation that benefits the city and opposes legislation detrimental to the city. So including bills that would limit the ability of self-government, that would mandate increased city costs through legislation at the state capitol by mandating a decrease in city revenue, or limiting the ability to advocate on behalf of the community. And then anything that would diminish the authority to provide public health, safety, and welfare. And so that's a broad statement because as I mentioned before, there's over 2,000 bills that get filed. There's a broad range of topics. It's important for us to have some broad statements to make sure that we can operate within those guidelines as we work to respond to specific legislation that's adopted. There are some specific things, and these are the captions under each portion. One is preserve municipal government policy enactment, which basically what that means is it goes along with the principle of self-government, the ability to make a variety of decisions locally, just recognizing the various needs of cities across the state of Texas. We also then have several policy statements under each one of these categories. So the first one is on property tax relief and revenue. And so it highlights the need for transparency in the adoption of tax rates and property taxes and the financial situation or financial budgets and reports of the city, to being able to manage local revenue. So that deals with revenue caps and other issues, as well as then managing our debt plan. So making sure that we have the ability and authority to manage our debt appropriately. The next one is related to our utilities, which really is around being able to, again, manage our utilities and also the use of a right-of-way. So this includes the water utility to the electric utility. And then the next is keeping Georgetown competitive, which focuses on economic development. So there is authorization at the state level to provide for the cities to be able to provide economic development to drive jobs and increase jobs. We've had a great partnership with the state of Texas and driven a lot of jobs growth in Texas. In fact, probably the most job growth in the state of Texas versus across the country. And there's specific tools that we want to make sure stay intact. Examples of that are 4A and 4B corporations. So that's a sales tax that can be dedicated to for economic development purposes. The next item is transportation funding for current and future growth. That centers around making sure we have the authority to raise funds as part of the debt planning to make sure that we can raise funds for transportation improvements. One of the things we hear the most about when we ask people what concerns do you have in Georgetown, one of the top things I hear is traffic and transportation, and that all is related to our growth. So making sure we have funding. There's also funding resources at the state level, significant funding that's been established over the last couple of sessions. We want to make sure that that stays in place. Examples of that include the Williams Drive overpass, which is being funded through TxDOT, which the city is not providing local funding on that. We're providing local funding for areas like Williams Drive and Interloop and a lot of those things, and the state of Texas is providing funding for the needed improvements, Williams Drive and other intersections like that. The next area is under planning and development to maintain Georgetown's unique character. So this focuses on annexation as a growing city. We know that annexation is an important part to make sure that we have the ability to have equity between taxpayers, as well as to make sure that we have more efficiencies with our city services. So you can imagine the challenges of that when you have areas in the city that are, we call them donut holes, where they're surrounded, they're not in the city limits because the city's grown around it. And there's the inability, there's actually between the county and the city, there's an inefficiency in being able to provide consistent services to all the folks that are in kind of in city, out city, and a hodgepodge or Swiss cheese effect, what that looks like across a county if you're not able to annex accordingly. The other thing that we want to focus on planning is related to our shot clock, which is development review. There was legislation put in last session. We think there needs to be a lot of clarification working with the development community to better respond to our development process. And then lastly, it's working on more flexibility with building materials. And so there's limitations on how cities can regulate building materials. And we want to make sure there's more flexibility for local communities to be able to provide more decisions around that. And then the last two areas, one is parks and recreation investment for a healthy Georgetown. There is some funding. There's not a lot of funding at the state level, and it's really set up that way for cities to be able to have tools to self-govern. There's limited funding at the state level for cities. There is some local parks grants. So when you get buy sporting goods, and the sales tax actually goes towards a dedicated source, and there's actually grant funding that's allowed for local parks. Katy Crossing Trail is a great example of that. It's a new trail that's going in Georgetown. That's funded partially through these state funds. There's also funding at the library level, as well as through for arts, a little bit of funding for arts. And then there's authority that's provided through a hotel motel tax to go towards arts funding. So we want to make sure those things continue to be preserved. So what are our next steps? So we're going to continue to outreach with our legislators. We want to do stakeholder outreach through our legislative agenda. And we want to build a digital network of community advocates. So what does that look like? So we'll be doing some public outreach. We're also going to be encouraging people to be legislative ambassadors. So if you want to know about city bills or city-related bills that are being filed throughout the session and activities that we're working on, there's ways in which you can go online and sign up. On our main page on the website, you'll see a link. It's called Legislative Ambassadors. It has our legislative program on it. Has the ability for you to submit your email and be on email lists, so you can be alerted or included as an ambassador of the city, and then you can communicate with you or be involved, express opinions at hearings that occur throughout the legislative session. So that is all. I know we have a lot to go through, so thank you for the time that you've given me, and look forward to questions as we get to the end of this. Thank you very much.
Not a reflection of.
No, it's COVID. I got
Sign
it.
of the time.
Yes, I absolutely. Okay.
So next to the microphone, I'd like to introduce Jim Johnson. Of course, he is the president and CEO of the Georgetown Chamber. Over these past years, I've been very proud to call him a colleague, a friend. Jim, please come to the podium.
Hi, everybody. I'll actually say it is a reflective of you, David. I am going to wipe down everything on that end. So I tease. Thanks so much, everybody who's joining us online and in person. Today, I'm going to paint a picture of why your Chamber of Commerce is involved in advocacy. Kind of share a little bit of the history of that and discuss briefly our priorities. I have printed copies of those. But as David said, we have a great agenda and we want to give time for all three of us to speak. So as we get started, David had a great trivia question. How many chambers of commerce are in the state, across the state? I'm curious. Yes, two. No, that's wrong, two. Anybody else have another guess? 500, 633 different chambers of commerce across the great state of Texas. I had to look up that data. I did not know that 10 minutes ago, so I had to ask somebody that actually knew the answer to get that, but I just thought that was interesting. So today's purpose really is for you to understand a little bit of the history of your chamber and go back a little bit and explain that this is not something new for us to do our 2021 legislative priorities. Talk briefly on our strategic direction as the organization and why we are doing that, and understand the process for the 2021 legislative priorities. But before I get into any further in this, I think it's important, and I think Hugh Brown might be watching, and we'll record this later. If I have the opportunity, I always have to talk about the mission of the Chamber, because today's presentation dives into that a little bit more. And it is to facilitate economic success for our community through advocacy, education, and collaboration. It does not mean that your chamber is a lobbyist, but we recognize that advocating for the businesses that we represent, advocating for our members is important to economic success. And when I go into our history, you'll see where those areas connect. Our vision is a chamber of excellence committed to economic development, education, healthcare, and public safety. And I have printed copies of our 2021 legislative priorities. For those online, Allison can include a link to that when we go and you get your post-event survey. But we want to make sure that you recognize that when you look at our priorities, they tie into those four cornerstones. They tie into education, quality education, ties into economic development incentives to allow our businesses to be recruited to come here. It ties into healthcare, ensuring cost of healthcare is affordable for our businesses and our citizens. It even talks about portions of public safety relating to criminal justice reform. And I say that meaning people that go through our system be allowed to come be a part of our workforce in the future. And they have our three priority areas: advance a community of excellence, be the voice of business, and create member value. That be the voice of business. And we'll talk about this, but we have to make sure that we represent those businesses and be their voice. We have the city that does a great job. We have a wonderful state representative that does a good job in Austin. But we were formed to be an association of businesses. So we need to be their voices. And I say that as I dive into the site. If I talked about the vast majority of our members and why they join, they tell us this. They tell us that they're looking for growth. They're telling us that they look for visibility. They're looking for credibility. I put this slide in here because it doesn't say that they're looking for advocacy. It doesn't say that they're looking for information on what's taking place in Austin. But all those areas, the DC area, all that trickles into our members and in making sure that the business climate here in Georgetown is successful so that they can have growth, visibility, and credibility with our area. So I stopped and I put this slide up and it says chamber is advocacy. And if you've seen my membership orientation presentation, you might have seen a similar slide that I've done before, but I paused because I think this tells such a good story. On my right in here, and if you're viewing on the screen at home, it's on your left, is a picture. And you're probably not familiar where this picture was taken. It's not in Georgetown. This isn't some part of Lake Georgetown that you've never seen before. This is Maricela, France. And I pause and say, this is where the very first Chamber of Commerce was established. Back in 1599, ship merchants came together because that channel that you see was too shallow. And they wanted to dredge it to make it deeper. Because a deeper channel meant more ships could come. More ships meant more customers, more trade, more business for this area. I didn't say that they dredged it for growth, credibility, and visibility, but a deeper channel coming together to advocate for that meant growth. It meant credibility. It meant visibility. And over time, we furthered that mission by saying, now that we have those three things, we can do ribbon cuttings because we're celebrating the new company coming in. So Chamber has been here since 1599 across the world, and right here in Georgetown since 1947. And I used some data real quick for you guys to give you a history snapshot of your chamber. When we were established in the 40s, I don't see records of ribbon cuttings taking place till decades later. I see records of 1956. I see a water committee that came together that worked on research to eventually dam the San Gabriel River and create Lake Georgetown. Adequate water supply, future growth. I see a conversation about downtown parking in 1958. Downtown, we were talking about it. And I write this, and I used this story before. 1959, we came up with a solution for downtown parking, David. And I said, hey, we told our members not to park in downtown Georgetown, and that would solve our downtown parking situation. 1959, the chamber advocated for a $10,000. We raised $10,000 for a purchase of land for the very first, and it said, the notes of the minute say Old Folks Home, which became the Wesleyan. And if you go back and look at that, the chamber in the 1950s thought senior population would be vital to economy. Notice I'm not saying that there's notes about ribbon cuttings. It's about what we were doing. We actually were part of the vote, and it was actually a good amount of people that came out and voted and supported us changing that land. It was parkland and made it for the purchase of the Wesleyan. In 1995, we jumped a couple decades. 1995 to 2006, the staff proofs most of my slides, and they do a good job. And they questioned, what are you talking about? State Highway 130 does not run from Washington, D.C. To Georgetown. But in the mid-90s, Chamber Board leadership was in Washington, D.C. advocating for State Highway 130. And just last week, the city broke ground at an airport extension where a company where 130 and Airport Boulevard come into Titan Development is coming in, and a large business park taking place at that area where 130 and Georgetown come together. And even as recently as 2011 to 2013, we had salamander discussion. Our Georgetown Development Alliance was regularly looking at 3 salamanders that were native to this area and trying to identify if they were endangered species or not. And I wasn't part of those conversations. I'm not a scientist, but it was to make sure that if it was a protected habitat along the San Gabriel River, that could impact some of our development in that area. But the research showed that it wasn't exclusive to that area, and we could continue to develop it in appropriate ways. But as those who are in development or real estate in the room, imagine if there are protected habitats, how much that limits your opportunity to develop. And we made sure that it wasn't and moved forward with that. And so there's a little bit of history, but you dive into just recently, a lot of conversations that we have regarding advocacy, making sure that the business climate is strong, whether it's GDA discussing water availability, us supporting the Williamson County Transportation Bond, supporting the use of Georgetown future land use map. So we make sure it's quality development for Georgetown. Chamber issued papers and wrote letters to the city regarding downtown parking, the future land use. We were at council in February talking about liquor laws and giving information that we obtained from our members about the extension of hours for sale. So we look at these things. It doesn't always mean that we have an official position on it, but we are advocating for members in bringing that information and then PPP funding this whole year with that. So history does, in fact, repeat itself. And so why do we do what we do, and why do we do all these things? Because, again, it goes back to growth, but to be the voice of business. You heard me mention that earlier. To represent the interests of over 1,000 members and their 5,000 plus employees, and to educate our members on who is running for office. This is a fairly new shift. And if you've followed our program, you notice that we do local candidate forums. We don't endorse candidates, actually against our policies and procedures to endorse a candidate running for local office. But we want our members to be educated on where they stand on issues impacting their business. There's great organizations doing candidate forums, but we want our questions to be like, what is the most important infrastructure project important to you? How do you define quality economic development in Georgia? issues that as business leaders, y'all are interested in. So we want you to be there. And in a non-COVID year, we normally host an elected officials reception. We want to celebrate what they do, but we also want to make sure you know who's representing you, because that's where those real connections. And if you want growth and credibility and visibility, sometimes it does take knowing your elected officials to get that. So I'll want to dive into our process for how we create our 2021 legislative priorities. Wanted to explain why we do what we do, and now how do we get to these legislative priorities. We do ongoing feedback. Every event you come to, you get a survey. We're asking comments and questions. We want to know what's impacting your business. Year to date, we've done 100 plus surveys in person over the last 18 months. We've done 250 responses directly to our advocacy outreach questions, over 700 other surveys per member. We take all that data and look for common themes and questions to consider to identify issues. Does this have significant impact on our members? Does the issue enhance or hinder the business climate in Georgetown? Can we actually impact change on the issue? Is it broad enough for the board to address? Is the issue, if it has social consideration, is it something to believe the chamber should be involved in? Does it go back to our mission? And if it is yes, it goes through a process. It goes through our governmental affairs committee. It goes through our executive committee. It goes to the board of directors. And then we have to actually do something with that information. We put that back out to the information. So if those questions are yes, there's a formal process it goes through. It's not just Jim Johnson and Allison McKee saying, we're writing our legislative priorities. We have great input from our members and our approved governing structure. But occasionally there is something that comes up that the answer is no. And we have to respond to our members because you asked them about it. And then we educate and communicate on why no action was taken. We don't want to be an organization that just says, Ray, no. We want to explain this is where there are questions to consider, did not take it another level. So then after that, our governmental affairs committee, as I mentioned, is represented 7 to 9 voting members that is board approved. They also provide the questions for the candidate forums. And then our board of directors is the final say in approving the legislative priorities, addressing individual issues. Because if it's not in our legislative priorities, we need to go through that entire process again for a specific one-off issue. And then it is stressed in our program of work. I just want to pause and say reminders, all issues are reviewed and discussed. Chamber was created to advocate for strong business climate, which facilitates your economic success. And we will continue to be your advocate as a business organization here in Georgetown, going back to 1947, worldwide since 1599. We're here to advocate for you guys, and we want to make sure. And so I have printed copies for those in the room. Again, those online will get a digital copy of our legislative priorities. But we thank you guys for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Anthony for our next introduction. Thank y'all. Kind of defeats if I don't have the mask on.
I don't know what you're talking about. You know, something that Jim spoke about, and what's so very important is that we know our leadership. So we thank the chamber for giving us that opportunity to network, quite frankly, with folks that we think we'll never be able to talk to. So, you know, once upon a time long ago, working in politics, a lot of folks just didn't either know who their representative was at the state or at the national level, or they didn't know, gosh, when should I go to this person to help me out? So it's so very good that we do have the opportunity to meet with our elected leaders. So that is a great segue into our next and final speaker. I speak, of course, about Colonel retired Terry Wilson. And by the way, sir, happy belated Veterans Day.
Happy Veterans Day to you, sir.
Thank you. Colonel Wilson was born in Odessa, Texas. He's a lifelong conservative Republican, committed husband and father, a decorated combat veteran. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Texas A&M University and a master's in strategic logistics plans and management from the Air War University. Terry recently retired from the Army after serving 30 years. Thank you for your service. Where he was a highly regarded senior leader within the Department of the Army. He is well versed in major weapons systems development, as well as command and control, communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems. As a Department of Defense acquisition executive, he managed research and development programs with multi-billion-dollar budgets and partnered in systems development with major corporations and universities. Terry gained a reputation for exceeding performance expectations while delivering needed capability that was ahead of schedule and under budget. He has an extensive experience providing leadership, balancing budgets, and working with Congress, Homeland Defense, and the State Department, and with foreign governments. Since retirement, he has leveraged that experience as an advocate for exceptional and talented small businesses, helping them break through bureaucracy and deliver technology to our warfighters. Terry has been married to his wife Shannon for 23 years, and together they have two sons, William, who is 15, and Benjamin, who is 16. They are members of the First Baptist Church in Marble Falls, where he serves on the nomination committee. He is also assistant scoutmaster and supports local education by speaking to students in the schools and serving on special projects. As state representative for House District 20, Terry serves on the appropriations and higher education committees and serves as chairman for House Interim Study Committee on Aggregate Production Operations. Ladies and gentlemen, my distinct honor to invite to the podium Colonel Wilson. Thank you very much.
And with that, I'll take questions. Chief, thank you so much. It's so good to see you again. And ma'am, how many Zoomers do we have out there? 23. Howdy out in Zoom land. I recently was sitting in your seat as I was watching previous meetings. And, you know, I just want to start off by thanking the chamber. Since the COVID pandemic and so forth like that, and yes, campaign season is over. It's a pandemic, okay? And we can debate that all day, but with campaign seasons being over, it's about good governance, right? That's what you expect of us. That's what we should expect of each other within our governments. But I will tell you that, you know, as I look at what this chamber has accomplished, it's absolutely amazing. Immediately upon lockdowns and the tough decisions that were made both locally and at state, you guys established webinars tackling issues that's important to our businesses. And I want to thank you. I want to thank all of y'all for doing that. The number of small business loans, helping our companies get past the supplemental billing and so forth like that, to be able to achieve those endeavors to help people to hang on. At the end of the day, was absolutely remarkable what our chambers have achieved. And Georgetown is really one of those gold stars that reached and moved quickly. So thank you. So, you know, what I love about this time of year is I don't have to look at Terry Wilson signs all over the place. I couldn't wait to get those damn things down. It is just absolutely amazing how those suckers darted every landscape, every corner. It's just amazing. I bet we had 20,000 signs out there. And I couldn't imagine the city having to, and the state and the county having to get them off the right of ways and obstruction just so one person can put their sign in front of the other. Thank goodness that's over. It is a part for which is a mechanism for which we choose folks, but at the end of the day, it's really based in terms of not necessarily the words used, but the actions that are demonstrated. And I will tell you, we'll go into this next legislative session with all vigor and endeavor to do that. As I will tell you, starting tomorrow, your Williamson County delegation for the state legislature will be meeting. Myself and John Busey will be meeting tomorrow for coffee after he chooses his new office. That's right, in Capitol, there's this music that's going, and when the music stops, you know, you had been standing by a door to select your new office. Yes, that is happening. Maybe not to that. It's more along the lines of face masks and some airphones, people moving furniture. But at the end of the day, we'll be meeting to discussing what's important to Williamson County and our municipalities within. So that starts tomorrow. Now, that's as a delegation. But I will tell you that it actually started at the close of last session. I will be personally carrying 43 bills. It will probably be up somewhere about 48 to 50. Now, I'm going to tell you, you saw the numbers in David Brilliant's program with your ambassador program. Is it okay if I sign up for that as well? Bridget, can I get a? Have y'all met Bridget? Wonderful. She's going to keep David in line and me as well, I guarantee you. So at the end of the day, that's what we need, because I'm going to tell you, between what our cities inform me, I don't need a lobby group, if you will. I don't need somebody to come tell me what the constituents who elected me to come there and serve them. But I'm going to tell you, it helps. It helps when I hear from the city, and especially the chamber. If you look at the chamber, for example, in your 2019 requirements, you basically said those 4 pillars. Matter of fact, I remember the last time I was here to speak, this room was packed out. And I was to discuss one of the pillars, education. And I remember over there was a table with, of course, superintendents and school board members and so forth like that, because frankly, public education should be a pillar. It is an absolute. When you look at the fact that it's 1/3 of our state budget, Health and Human Services slightly over that, but another pillar. But at the end of the day, y'all's feedback was important. And I think I shocked some folks, Jim, when I spoke, or at the time it was, I believe Randy from was there as one of our leaders within. But you know, at the end of the day, I think I took everybody to school on what really was behind public education and the issues associated with it. The fact of the matter is that issue had been kicked down the road, often through many legislative sessions, probably for a dozen or more sessions. The fact of the matter is we got it done. That was House Bill 3. And what I wanted to lay out to y'all, and remember, this was before the election for the 2021 session. But at the end of the day, I told you at the end of the day, what our issues is we are pitting our communities against our public schools by the way in which we fund our schools. Let's face it, David, I believe it's what, 61% of your tax bill goes to the school district on your property taxes. So that had to be fixed. But how do you do that? At the end of the day, Dan Huberty, and I appreciate him carrying that bill, but House Bill 3 addressed it. It wasn't about how do you just strictly fund public education, but the importance of the elements that had been ignored that needed to be addressed within public education. We gave $4.6 billion in additional funding just to pay teachers what they're worth. And I'm going to tell you, that was not enough. We went to special programs that moms and grandmothers and parents and so forth and aunts and uncles and even neighbors care about. And that is the fact that, you know, at the end of the day, public education, just for the sake of, you know, those basic blocking and tackling English and math, but it needs to lead to a vocation. It needs to learn, it needs to enable somebody to look to their innermost and not just say it's 4-year degree to get to success. It's about what is it that drives you in your artistic mode or whatever it may be it a welder, electrician, a carpenter. So how do we leverage a vocational within our public education? But those are the things that we talked about in here. And the fact of the matter is, the good news is within the 86th session, we did it while addressing property taxes. Now, did anybody see a change in their property taxes for 2019? Not really. You saw your valuations go up. But what you should see in 2020 and 2021 is the fact that not only transparency of knowing when, where, and how, and who's going to look at your tax rates for each tax entity, you will see that at the end of the day, we stop the growth of how much your taxes are going to grow by valuation. Simply by things that's not necessarily great that every city or county will be appreciative, because we did establish caps. So look, unfortunately, we make David Morgan's job harder because there's some bad actors out there. There are some bad actors that will push their tax increase up to 8% in major metropolitan areas. Taxing entities that would just totally blow your mind in terms of the amount of growth in their taxes. But I want to tell you, you've had a responsible government here in Georgetown and Williamson County. You've had a responsible city manager in terms of how they manage the city. But when you look at the whole across House District 20, it pained me to support legislation such as that. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is we're responsible. I looked at the most that this area has ever increased their taxes was 4.25%. Nowhere close to the 8% cap. But at the same time, you'll look at Harris County and our major metropolitan areas, and what they will do is to ensure that they can continue to push the needle. They'll hire lobbyists at a $782,000 bill to its citizens to make sure that they campaign to ensure that legislation such as that doesn't get by. So unfortunately, we have some casualties when it comes to those hard decisions such as that. Because at the end of the day, small business is not going to continue to thrive if taxation is through the roof. That is a very hefty bill for our small businesses. And I look at a lot of y'all are shaking your heads up and down. But at the end of the day, what helps me is when I can call David and he and I have a frank discussion during the legislative session, how will this impact you? Because then you get to write some things in there that basically carves that and does things so that we don't hurt many in the process of getting after bad actors. And sometimes that happens. The good news is we got House Bill 3. Why? Because it's a cornerstone and pillar of the chamber. We did on Health and Human Services, affordable health and human services. Behavioral health. Thank y'all for being here. You're going to see it addressed in this legislative session. It was addressed in the last. But the bottom line is we were able to get after things like surprise medical billing. Where did we establish our priorities? From folks just as sure as those sorts of things and those programs in which y'all established. No longer will you be able to go to a hospital and while you're sitting there waiting for your surgery, remember they bring in about a stack of paperwork for you to sign while they're sticking an IV in your arm? You know that, right? That's how it goes down in some cases. And next thing you know is you're signing away an anesthesiologist who isn't necessarily covered by your insurance. And you think that everything is taken care of. But then you get that surprise bill where you got a $9,000 bill because there was an out-of-service anesthesiologist that was used instead, anesthesiologist. No more. We don't have to worry about those sorts of things. Where does that come from? That comes from input of knowing what's actually happening on the ground. And the chamber and our local governments telling us how it's happening. I appreciate this county and especially Georgetown telling me that when it comes to mental health and behavioral health issues, it's not being addressed in our hospitals. It's being addressed in our jails. That's not right. So the state legislature in the last two sessions have addressed the behavioral issues during the Ann Richards period where we cut behavioral health spending during that time frame and put our Texas hospitals, some closed, some partially closed. Now we are full blown in terms of revamping those and increasing the capacity and making sure that we have the skill set by the experts to be able to address those in hospitals. And we don't have near enough. We need to continue after that. There was some additional legislation that was addressed that frankly we're going to have to relook. The shot clock. David, thank you for bringing that up. Look, when we go after legislation that basically helps industry and businesses to be able to get their permits quickly, we don't necessarily get it right the first time. There's some clarity legislation that needs to happen. And obviously, sure, I'll be looking forward to those discussions and so forth. But at the end of the day, Terry, out of those 43, probably on its way to 48 to 52 bills, what makes up the most of the legislation? And it's the polling that you do. I take everything into account. No, I don't take groups who basically want to take you out to dinner or to golfing or to that fishing trip or that hunting trip and so forth. Matter of fact, Terry Wilson hasn't gone on a single one. The lobbyists will sit there and tell you, well, how am I supposed to talk to you? Well, I'll tell you really easy. Let me give you my cell phone number. It doesn't require those sorts of things. Because the fact of the matter, and you heard in my bio, I'm used to working with lobbyists, even in uniform. See, the beautiful thing about lobbyists is they know if they ever lie to you, they'll never have access again. So when it comes to utility districts and so forth like that, by the way, the state legislature has to approve, I know that the small town of Gerald and so forth like that, okay, don't have the staff to get there to get that legislation pushed through. So I expect some lobby effort in that regards when we put our MUDs and our studs in place and so forth. So I'm going to tell you that I loved it when I basically put those RFIs on the table and, you know, the General Dynamics and the Northrop Grummons and the Lockheed Martins and the Raytheons of the world would come for a source selection. They would compete for these multi-billion-dollar projects. At the end of the day, I loved their lobby because they always told me what was wrong with the other company's plan, which made it better for us. But 90% of Americans out there, if you ask them about lobby, it's supposed to be a negative word, isn't it? It's supposed to be, lobby, you're lobby. No, actually, lobby serves a good purpose. What we don't need is when lobby make sure that they go out there and they try to influence something that isn't necessarily in the best interest of the particular district I serve. And strong arm an agenda. And that's where we, as your government, has to make sure that accessibility is controlled. But at the same time, provide a format for which they can inform us. And I'll be looking forward to that discussion. The only reason why I'm talking about it is because besides COVID and besides redistricting, okay, and besides the fact that our revenue is less, but our requirements are high in terms of a budget, that will be one of those that will be addressed. And I got to make sure whatever we do, when we address, for example, lobby, we don't break things. So I wanted to make sure that I put that out there and folks understand, because that is going to be one of the things that will be one of the priority discussions in this legislative session. Now, I will tell you, we're very fortunate in the state of Texas. You know, when I was an acquisition executive in uniform on those multi-billion-dollar programs, I literally had have a business staff of 3. A business staff of 3 that was reading every piece of legislation that was signed into law. And the reason why at the federal level is because bills in Congress do not have to be germane. They can have a defense rider in the middle of National Parks bill. And you had to search that stuff out. Thousands upon thousands of bills. Here's the good news, the state of Texas doesn't do that. 7,500 plus bills that they pointed out, absolutely correct. But the bills have to be germane. You know exactly what that bill's about. Bridget's saying, thank God. I couldn't imagine a personal one having to look through all those. 1,789, I think, was the total bills. A little bit different than your number. Thank goodness that was 1,789 that was passed by the legislature. Thank goodness the governor vetoed 58 of them. He probably could have vetoed another 1,500. But at the end of the day, it does make it a little bit easier for us to understand what we're doing when we have that legislation and look for those hidden things. I will tell you that when you look to this upcoming session, now this is me from serving on appropriations and so forth, I can tell you right now where our priorities are going to be. Zoomers, you're hearing it live. Our priorities for the legislature will be public and that is public health, public education, and public safety. That's where our focuses are going to be. Because at the end of the day, and y'all just saw where the comptroller basically says that we're at a $4.6 billion revenue shortfall right now. I will tell you, pending what happens in the near future, because we are seeing some spiking, that can rise anywhere between 10 to 20 billion for the biennium that we'll address in 22 to 23. That is significant. But here's the good news. Texas today is not like Texas 10 or 12 years ago, where we were so dependent on oil and gas. Because of businesses and entrepreneurship and the fact that we are a welcoming state where other companies have moved into Texas, we had diversified significantly. So our revenues, okay, now you can grade me later on, but instead of that 20 billion, I think we're going to be somewhere between 8 and 11 billion. Because a lot of industries have continued to be able to move and to work and to employ. My biggest concerns in the following congressional supplementals, which by the way, I want to thank Congressman John Carter. From the outset, I could call him directly in terms of the impact, and it's very helpful when you have a congressman that is very senior in Congress. Doesn't matter who the speaker is, but at the end of the day, he was able to influence our first supplemental to make sure that it got after things that put our schools in bind. I'm just going to give you one example. A lot of federal funding and regulation has to do within our public schools as how we address our special education kids that have challenges. All those monies and so forth comes with strings that you have to do this and do that. He made sure within our supplementals and so forth that those were addressed. Congressman Carter, if your team out there watching today, thank you so much. It was very helpful. And how we address some of our small businesses and especially our 501(c)s. He made sure that that was addressed. Thank you again for taking that call. So, with that being said, I basically laid out where y'all have been instrumental in informing me. Secondly, of where we are today in terms of our priorities. And I think that pretty much leaves our question and answer time. Thank you very much for your time. And oh, by the way, if we go into Q&A, do we have time for that?
Yeah, we have time for 1 or 2 questions, Anthony. I'll let you facilitate that.
Okay. When we do that, be careful, because if you dare to ask, I'm dare to answer. All right.
Any questions for any of our speakers?
You got the Zoom land, Allison?
Sherry, you want to talk about the blasting in Williamson County?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for asking, sir. We were talking about that a little earlier. So we're very aware that the significant growth in the state of Texas. And oh, by the way, if you were able to watch the town halls recently, you would have heard on my town hall where the demographer says we're increasing by 1,000 plus per day. 1,000 plus per day. Half of those is just by births. The other half plus, if you will, is folks coming and moving into Texas. Let me tell you, a family of 4 requires 18,000 tons of aggregate that makes your asphalt and your concrete. Guess what? In this beautiful central Texas region in our hill country, that mineral happens to reside right here. Williamson County, and I serve Barnett County, Milam County as well, are the top 2 in terms of aggregate companies in the state of Texas. A lot of demand for road capacity and extension. The number of concrete that's being poured for our buildings, both commercial and our residential homes, is significant. And it requires a special stone. And it happens to be here. And so we've been addressing it since the first session. I chair the committee that looks at the surface mine here in Texas. Let me tell you something. Aggregate is not our enemy. They are our friends. But here's the problem, is they're no longer a Texas industry. This industry is coming from Colorado, New York, Pennsylvania, Ireland, the biggest, Brussels, and Denmark. Spain, close border. They're investing in aggregate. Why? Because they're investing in Texas. When they see the growth, they see opportunities. Look, aggregate is a big business. When you look at aggregate, okay, when you have companies like Martin Marietta that puts satellites in orbits and builds aircraft in the rock crushing business, that means there's a lot of money. So with that being in our backyard, a lot of things are happening. One, we have a lot of overweight trucks. That causes the problem for David. His budget to repair roads is, restrained. How can you increase capacity if you can't even afford to sustain your roads because of the overweight trucks? You ever stay at a stoplight and notice the big divot where the tires are? That's from overweight vehicles. How many cars cause that? None. It's overweight trucks. Our county commissioner, Valerie Covey, Cynthia Long, Commissioner Woods, and Russ Bowles, they struggle because they have to increase capacity because this county's growing so fast, but they can hardly afford to sustain our roads. So the good news is the aggregate's here and it's cheaper to pour that concrete pad here because it's so close. The bad news is it's here and it's causing a lot of second and third echelon damage. And so when you look at the fact that these aggregate companies pull millions of gallons of water, but they're not all like Texas Georgetown, a great company. They will pull millions of gallons of water, but they won't recirculate the water. How is that? They will sit there like Texas Georgetown will have a shake and bake where the bottom line is you load the truck and before you get to where you enter the road, there's a long concrete pad for a lot of debris to fall off prior to entering the highway. Texas Georgetown makes sure that they have that capacity and they provide a resting station for our Department of Public Safety and our municipal police officers to be able to be there. So the trucks can see, oh my gosh, I got an axle missing or an inside tire. I better not take this load before I enter the highway. I could go on and on and on, but the gold standards like Texas Georgetown, a Texas company that's been here 7+ years, are slim. Predictability on blasting. At the end of the day, 95% of the blasting is probably within the margin that INSHA and so forth allow. The bottom line is, can they be a better community participant where they say, hey, guess what, at noon. If you're going to be a blast, it's going to be at noon instead of all hours. So those are some of the things that we'll be getting after the next legislative session without hurting the industry. What got my attention to this is we had a company out of New York, Dow River. Yeah, I'll say it, Dow River. They went in, and at the end of the day, they placed a rock crushing in the middle of 2 neighborhoods, or between 2 neighborhoods on 200-acre swath of land. That's not right. They bookend a community that spent $32 million to basically bring the infrastructure in place and bring a $262 million Scott and White hospital in, just for a rock crusher to come in and buy the land next door. It's not right. Long answer. Next question.
Any else? No? Well, ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you. Thank you.
I see that does it for not only this morning, but for 2020. And we will see you again in 2021. We hope that in the new year, we look forward to being together again, a time where we can do so without fear. So thank you very much for a very good 2020, and we'll see you in 2021. See you.
Great, thank you.
Okay.